Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefühl and welcome to Madrid and the brand new A45. Well, it's been almost a year and a half since Mercedes brought out the brand new A-Class. Much, I think it's fair to say, to general appreciation. And ever since then, I and most of the auto journalists I know have been more than a little bit excited to get our hands on this. This is, of course, the performance version, the A45. It's usually the biggest statement Mercedes can make about the most power you can put into a small form factor. Now, the last time this model came out, I think it's fair to say it received slightly mixed reviews, not because of the performance and the drive, mostly because of the extremely expensive price point. Even Mercedes themselves weren't completely convinced that their customers were going to go for it, and that's why they sold almost twice as much as their initial estimates. So needless to say, the expectations for their latest version are a little bit higher. Well, they threw down pretty large with the last generation of the A45, so have they managed to do it justice in the latest one? Let's take a closer look and find out. Let's go. There it is. Yes! One of the standard problems the designers face when they make sporty versions out of their regular hatchbacks is they have an awful lot of muscle to add on to things that are essentially small family cars. Well, Mercedes haven't had that challenge for some time, since they threw away the old first generation box design and went something that was a lot sportier to begin with. The AMG updates have looked a lot more intentional and as though they are supposed to be there right from the start. Well, that said, there's still a lot that's visually different to the AMG A45 than the standard A-Class. And there's no better place to start by pointing that out here at the bonnet. Well, we have an absolute beast of an engine to fit underneath that, so it's only right that we should get a little bit more visual lift right at the start when we look at it. Look at these creases right into the top. They state that they mean business before you even get down to the lower third, and that's really where the muscle's all been put on this car. Now, if you remember the last generation, we had a starburst grille. Here we have the Pan America that has become so popular from so many other models. I think it's strident and bold on the A45. Yes, it's a very big front visually. There's an awful lot happening here. There are big, bold statements that have been made right throughout. But when you consider what this car is packing underneath this domed bonnet, well, I think it's a reasonable first statement to be making. coming through to the side, and it's nice to see just how much of that sporty characteristic has been carried through the car. There is no way from any angle of looking at this thing you could possibly mistake it for a standard A-Class. And that's hugely important. Why? Well, since the introduction of the last one, there has of course been the A35. So the most important thing is always going to be when you pull up in an A45, it's imperative that people don't think it could be anything else. So this styling here is particularly effective. There are some particularly nice touches. If we have a look a little lower down, these are custom 19-inch rims. Really nice. I think they set the car off very well, but this is what we really want to be looking at. A 6-caliper disc brake. That gives you some indication of just how they're going to try and tame this wild beast once we get to driving it. If you look down at the lower fairing, there are some subtle but definitely stated styling details that just keep that sporty feel carrying on right through the lines of the car. If you follow the way that the roof line sweeps through to the back, the eye is drawn to this muscular lower third, and again these 19-inch rims, and of course significantly smaller calipers. Come on, that's the back. We don't need to worry about that in quite the same way. And then everything swoops around into this really nice discreet spoiler at the rear, and of course the back. Round at the back now, and I'm going to get just a little bit controversial here. Yes, I am well aware quite how much everybody hates fake exhaust pipes, and here we have 4 chrome-clad whoppers. If you have a look through here, you'll see that there is in fact just one exhaust port per side. So, completely unnecessary, complete overkill. But I encourage you to think as you look at the rear of this car has more power per litre than any other standard production car in its class. So it really does need to make quite a significant visual statement when you're sitting behind it. And for that reason alone, I'm going to forgive these massive fake exhausts. I think stylistically, when you combine them with this piano gloss rear air diffuser, they really set the rear off nicely. You've got a nice discreet lip at the top, very standard boot presentation. Bang! Look at the power in that lower third. And for this car, well, yeah, I'd have liked the real thing, but honestly, I can learn to live with it. I actually think it looks pretty great. But what about you? Well, if the outside of this car's a beauty, let's take a look at the beast that's powering it all. Jonas said, "You shut it again." He was right, I did. Well, Jonas comes in and gives you a close-up of that. I think you can agree they really haven't wasted a square inch of space in there. What you're looking at is a 2-litre 4-cylinder engine that somewhat improbably produces 421 horsepower, 500 newton meters of torque. That gives it a 0 to 62 or 0 to 100 speed of 3.9 seconds and a top speed of 270 kilometers per hour. Well, if you can think of anywhere in this car that could possibly fit any more engine into it, I would like to know about it. Clearly, this is the pièce de résistance. An awful lot of work has gone on in this car. There's a huge amount of new technology, but this is the heart of it. This engine needs to be able to deliver the top possible performance that you can get from a car within this class. So, does it live up to its claims? Well, let's take a look and find out. Well, fortunately, Mercedes didn't just spoil us with the A45, they also let us have the CLA 45 S as well. So what are we looking at here? Well, essentially it's the same car, same platform, same engine, same powertrain, but as you can see, the styling is quite significantly different. It differs mainly in 2 key respects. The car is now longer. The A45 is 4 meters 45. This one clocks in at 4 meters 70. So, okay, I know the metric imperial thing. To give you a sense of perspective, that's about that much longer. So a significant increase in length, but also we have an increase in rear width on the wheels, and that's because this has wider flared wheel arches at the back, so we have slightly wider rear wheels, and that does change the handling dynamic slightly. But before we get to that, we're just going to take a quick walk round to show you some of the key characteristics of this car. Well, for me, if the A45 is all about angularity, if I had to pick up one word to describe the CLA, it would be svelte. A lot of that anger has been sucked out of the design, and it's much more sleek in its appearance. So at the front here, we still have that aggressive, bold statement, but it's been softened, it's been made more elegant. A lot of that harsh angularity has been smoothed out, and as you can see, the lines are a lot more flowing. This classic CLA bonnet design, but still with the raised dome bonnet that we've already met from the A45, still giving that feeling of power and presence and dominance on the road. But here, it draws you back right into the car. As we look to the flank and see how it sweeps back, everything is so much more flowing here. Now, obviously, a lot of this is going to be a matter of personal taste. The drive characteristic is different, so we will come on to that in a little bit. But if it's purely a styling question for you, the CLA tends to have a very committed following. So my sense is that people who love the CLA, the A45 just isn't going to do it for them, and vice versa. My personal taste, I'm kind of A45 all the way. I like the flowing style here, but for me, this is an aggressive hot hatch, and that's how I want it to look. But I really like the way the style has been applied to this car. That extra length really changes the dynamic here. And as you can see with that slightly broader rear perspective, the way that the car changes as you come into the back is very significant visually. Obviously, we've lost the spoiler from the top with this coupe line, but as we come through, it hasn't been forgotten. It's here on the lip of the boot, and that flattens out the rear significantly. But we still get that big, bold visual statement in the bottom third, and although the roofline makes it look very sleek and elegant, the back still says business. So, I like the way that the styling's been applied to this version. My heart lives for the A45, but tell me, what do you think? So here's the key, and as you can see, it's not exactly a revolution from what went before, and I have a feeling that that might speak volumes about what happens inside. Well, I don't think there were too many complaints about the styling from the previous A45, so really not radical reason to change. And as you can see from your first glance inside this car, conservative is the name of the game. All of the emphasis here is on comfort, sports and style. So, very first impression is always going to be at the door. A nice mix of materials here. There's a little bit of metal to give us a good solid finish, but as is often the case, I like the way that they finished the bottom in hard plastic. That's where the dirt always goes, and it's so much easier to keep clean. Often a problem with smaller cars that they don't have enough storage space. Look at that. That's a 1 litre bottle, and I can fit that both upright and fully flat. So lots of really good space there, and I certainly appreciate that. Now, these are sports seats, so these are going to be very distinct and different from what you would find in a regular A-Class. Question with sports seats, always the same, but are they comfortable to sit in? Well, let's get in and find out. First thing to note, as always, I have particularly short legs. So if that looked in any way slightly uncomfortable for me to get in, that's only because I have to have the seat so far forwards for my driving position. I'm 5'10" in height, or 178 centimeters, and as you can see, I have ample amounts of headroom here. This car is set absolutely perfectly for me to drive. So as you can see from my spacious headroom here, if you're up to about 6'1" in height, this is what you will experience. So for a compact car, really nice to find the right amount of space for you to really feel at home. So the seat adjustments, as in common with lots of other Mercedes, are to be found embedded in the door, and as you can see, we have a memory function, so up to 3 different people can have the car perfectly set for them when they want to use it. So that's first impressions. What happens once you actually get settled into the car? Well, Jonas is going to come round so we can take a closer look. Well, there are lots of things to show you in here, and they all start with the push of this excellent start button. Well, first thing to talk about is clearly this display, and you have to give Mercedes some credit. It may have taken them a while to get on board with the idea of a touchscreen, but once they did, they certainly didn't waste any time into integrating something that looks really visually very impressive indeed. Here we have a driver's display and of course the infotainment / sat-nav display, and they are very highly modifiable. If I go through a few of the different options that I have available here, you can see that I can change what is displayed on the central display. Not only that, but if I use my central console, then I can also change, he said optimistically, there we are. And you can see there are always lots of different ways of interacting with the system. So here we are, styles and displays. Now clearly there are so many different options here. You are hardly about to want to get involved in doing all of these things while you're out on the road. So the driver system is nicely set that you can really only handle the basic configuration via the steering wheel. If you want more detail than that, you actually have to start digging into some menus. But you can immediately see and get a good sense that you're going to be able to find the style of display that suits you. Now, at first glance, I wasn't a huge fan of this breakdown of information here, but once you start getting into using the different system features, it really starts making sense. Now, I don't know if Jonas's camera is going to be able to pick that up from here or if he needs to reset for it. Can you get this dial in that shot, Jonas?
Yep.
I only want to show this briefly right now. I'm going to come back to it in a minute, but this is new. This is a mode setting button, and I just want you to see what that looks like when I twist it to cycle through the modes. And the reason for that is if Jonas now comes back up to the screen, what you can see up here is that as I cycle through those modes, it will show me the changes in drive characteristic that I'm affecting on the car when I change those modes. So if I start with comfort, you can see the setup there, and you can see that changing. That's sports plus, and then that's race. Now that's a nice visual clue, and as you get used to that as a reference system, it works pretty well. And it's not only that we have the option of adjusting. There are many different setups for the screen, and I think it's really important to point those out, because if you hate looking at one of these, don't worry, you're more than likely going to be able to find something that suits you a little better. For this car, there's a super sport setting. That's what this is. It really works nicely with the car. These will be very familiar to any modern Mercedes user. I have to tell you, if you are not used to the modern Mercedes interface, these do take a little bit of getting used to, but they do reward your patience. So once you get the feel for where everything is, it all feels very ergonomic, very tactile, and very nice to use. Now I have to say that is in contrast to these control knobs here. These are recent add-ins, and if you can see the little bit of movement I'm able to get on both of those, they just don't quite resonate with the quality that I would like and expect from this vehicle. Now this mode switch dial actually feels nice and solid to use while you're driving. I just maybe would have preferred a different material selection. If you have a look on the other side, you can see that this is telling us what's happening with the damping and the exhaust sound. And that's nice, because maybe you want a drive profile, but you don't really want to listen to the exhaust at that particular moment, or vice versa. So at least you have a quick and easy option to access that from here. And that's based on what Mercedes have experienced by way of driver feedback from the previous model. So good to see that integrated. Well, coming slightly further over, I don't know if this is because of driver feedback, but you will be pleased to see once again ample use of piano black fingerprint magnets on the dashboard. Well, this isn't the only finish you can get, so you don't have to feel stuck with it. It looks very nice, it's only that it doesn't stay that way for very long at all. Jonas was keen that I pointed out that it does, however, make a particularly comfortable handrest when you're trying to access the very extensive menu system on the infotainment system while you're driving down the road. These are very nicely put together, they're very solid, they look great, and they're well integrated into this dashboard. I wish they could have done something a little bit more with this. If I show you these controls here, Jonas, can you catch that on camera? That's a lot of lateral movement that I'm getting off that control panel simply by pushing down on the controls. It's a small detail, but you know what? This isn't a cheap car, so I think I would just have liked something that was a little bit more rigid. Coming slightly further down, we have an inductive charging pad for mobile phones, and if you can see the size of that, it's comfortably capable of taking one of the larger models, so you have more than enough room to future-proof your charging. There's also a USB-C charge point and car interface just here, and then two cup holders here, which have these nice feature buttons, so your cup will stay in its right place, irrespective of the size. Now, I'm a big fan of these. I know it's not new for Mercedes, but I always felt that they really utilized the software of these touchpads particularly well. This is a very nice natural place for your palm to rest, and in conjunction with the haptic feedback that it provides, you really can get a very good control over the car systems without needing to look at it, and I find that very helpful indeed. Similarly, this button layout is very tactile, very straightforward, nothing here to confuse or a very low risk of you pushing the wrong thing by mistake. Slightly further back, well, that's a very nicely delivered central console. It's got two USB charge points in there, and you can also use that for connecting to the infotainment system. So overall, the cockpit's really very nicely put together with a high quality of materials and a good finish. But I have to be honest, you would expect it to be, wouldn't you? I mean, this is not a cheap car and it's not a cheap brand. So I think Mercedes have done a nice job. I just would have liked just a bit more solidity in some of the materials used. Well, we know how much of the available space the engine took up, but can you actually fit real human beings back here? Is it a practical car to own and use? Well, let's take a closer look and find out. So, again, I'm 5'10" or 178 centimeters. And I have more than ample headspace back here. Look at that. Okay, it's nothing to write a book about, but given the profile and type of car, I could happily go on a longer drive in this. This, however, could be a problem. I do have particularly short legs, and this car seat is set for me, so I don't have huge amounts of knee room here. I'm slightly intrigued to see how a person with larger legs would get on. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to come out of the car and take the camera from Jonas. So now you can see realistically how it is. Jonas, what's your height?
1.93 m.
1.93 m. How far realistically could you travel in the back of that car?
It's okay.
Okay, so it's cozy.
It's okay.
We'll give it. What do you think? A 3.5 out of 5. Yeah, that sounds good. What Mercedes have done with this design is they have tried to use ergonomic styling on this seat to provide as much realistic leg space as they can. So they have used the space really well, and I'm very happy to see that the material selection back here has been as carefully thought out as it has in the front of the car. So overall, yes, it's not the most spacious car in the world, but I don't think that that's what people are buying it for. Really, this is a town runaround if you're considering only the chassis on which the car is based. And for that, there's more than enough room. There are, I'm pleased to say, latch points for 2 children's car seats back here. Although I kind of wonder what sort of children are going to be going in the back of one of these things with this kind of engine in. More likely you're going to have your friends. And between the central console and these pop-out cup holders, there's more than enough comfort back here for a pretty decent journey. Stylistically, there shouldn't be a whole lot to notice in difference between this and the A45. Certainly the feeling you get from the moment that you look at the interior is that very much it's business as usual. But there are some styling differences. As you can see in this car, we have the AMG logo and the slight decal on the dashboard. Overall, the main things you're going to notice about this are not going to happen to you until you start driving the car. But obviously, being a CLA, that means we have more of this swooping roofline. The car roofline in total is about 1 centimetre lower, but I think that's probably all in the spoiler at the rear on the A45. So what has the impact been on the rear seat experience? Can you still fit comfortably into the back of one of these? Well, now my immediate reaction was going to be to say, no. Obviously, anytime you have a swooping roofline, there's going to be a consequence. Now, I do have a particularly long torso, so you can compare my height really with about 6'1". So if I'm only taking a quick trip around town, absolutely fine, no problem at all. But for a long distance drive, I just don't know how comfortable I'm going to be back here. But come on, if you're buying one of these, it's not for the rear seat passengers, is it? We're at the Jarama race circuit just outside of Madrid, and that really is the only safe place that we're going to be able to take out this A45 S to get a real sense of just what all of that new technology and that brand new engine put together can deliver. Now, if you are a bit of a purist, some of the closer-eyed of you might have noticed my seating position does not look too great. There's a good reason for that. In the crash helmet, I can't sit further forwards than this. The seat's at its lowest point, so I have to sit slightly further back. It's not ideal, but it will work. The two main things that have changed about this car are the pure power and the dynamic. Let's not forget, this car delivers more power per litre than any standard production car. Sure, you can get it from supercars, but that's not what this is. This is a very hot hatch indeed. Now, as far as the handling is concerned, the rear torque vectoring is something that you just have to experience. It's extraordinary how much power you can carry both into turns and immediately out of them as well. Now, obviously, we're never going to get quite as much time to have fun on the race course as we would like, but in just a short amount of time, it really is phenomenal how much you can get out of this car without ever feeling that you're losing your edge or the control. So, we've got a nice uphill section here, which means we can really pour on some power. And as we come in for a hard straight line brake, just towards this next turn, here we are. You can see just how poised that delivery is. I'm really going to put the power on. You can hear the tyres going, but there's no point at which I'm ever at risk of losing traction completely. That's remarkable. Well, you're not going to get to drive every day like this in a car like this, but any day that you do is going to be a good one. Yes! Okay, so clearly not everybody's lucky enough to have a racetrack in their own back garden. So you're going to be spending most of your time with the A45 just driving around regular streets. Well, I don't think anybody could really accuse these of being regular streets. We're in the foothills up above Madrid. And whilst the driving conditions here are excellent, I have to tell you that the speed restrictions are fairly demanding as well. So this is a really nice opportunity to talk a little bit about what this car can deliver in regular day-to-day driving. The first thing to note, obviously, is the seating position. I'm a big fan of these bucket seats. I'm not completely convinced about some of the styling detail, but I have to tell you, they do a really nice balanced job of holding you very well for that sporty, dynamic driving and giving you plenty of comfort and support for day-to-day use. whilst being nice and easy to get in and out of. Some bucket seats for sports cars are obviously a little bit challenging when it comes time to pop in and out to the shops. These ones hit that balance point really nicely indeed. Driving position, excellent. I've got really good all-round visibility. I have to tell you that B-pillar is pretty large, but you do get enough glass behind it to get a good sense of everything that's going on. Road position itself is excellent. You have just the right balance between depth in the vehicle and also height on the road. So even though I'm in a small, slightly lower car, I don't feel that way at all. It's a very dynamic driving position, and that's clearly aided not only by the seat but also by the presentation of the steering wheel. Now, I do have some challenges about certain aspects of this steering wheel, but the one thing I do not have any challenges on is the way that it feels, looks and behaves in its simplest form. The weight of the car is really nicely delivered here. It's subtle enough and lively enough to make you think that it's not a real beast, but you feel the weight. The power steering is very nicely delivered in day-to-day use, so it gives you a feeling of solid driving, I would say, and it feels great under the hand, so really nicely put together and nicely delivered. Now, if you're familiar with a modern Mercedes experience, you'll be aware that they don't just go for one way of delivering an experience to you. They have at least 3 different ways of achieving almost anything you could want to mess around with while you're driving. And there are more than enough whistles and bells on this car to keep you entertained for a good amount of time. As a first-time user, you might find all of that technology a little bit overwhelming in terms of managing to adjust the particular thing you want to get to while you're using the car, but it actually turns out to be quite intuitive once you start digging around the systems, and you'll find your own particular way of accessing the bits that you want. What do I mean by that? Well, and now we come on to the slightly more advanced features of the steering wheel. There are so many different controls here, and it will, without question, take you a while to find out exactly which bit of what you want to be able to access with your thumbs while you are paying the most attention where it needs to be, which is on the road. That said, this new driving select knob that we have down here makes switching modes relatively straightforward. I say relatively straightforward, I'm still not 100% convinced, but easy enough that you can flick between modes for when you're between town and you're having some fun out in the countryside. Now, I wanted to start off in our regular or comfort mode here so I can show you the most relaxed that this car can be. Well, the first thing to note is that as relaxed as you try and make it, you really can't hide the nature of what this car is and what it does. So Jonas and I have found, for example, that the road noise, thanks to those 19-inch wheels, is really pretty loud no matter what you do. In comfort mode, the exhaust obviously is not producing the largest amount of sound, but it is an ever-present companion as you drive through the hills. So if you're the kind of person that likes a very still cabin environment and doesn't like to hear that contact with the road or that feedback from the engine, I'm not convinced this is going to be something that you're really going to enjoy. But if you want to know everything that that engine's up to, this car does not disappoint. Well, we're only in comfort mode at the moment, but don't let that fool you. They haven't tailed it down so much that you can't still access that power as and when you want it. So okay, as I've already said, we are a little bit hamstrung by the speed limits here, but I can still give you an idea of exactly what happens when you put your foot down. Wow. Now, needless to say, even though we're in comfort mode currently, nobody told the engine that, and when you demand that power, it is all delivered to you in a very satisfactory, heart-stopping bump. But if I twist this dial here, well, I don't know how the microphone will respond to that, but you might be able to detect that the sound profile of this car has changed significantly. Not only the sound, but the damping conditions, the steering, and of course the braking profile as well. And that immediately changes this drive from a nice cruise into something that's rather a lot more dynamic and demanding. Now, although I can't show you all of the fastest components of the drive, I do have enough speedability here to show you what rear torque vectoring can deliver for this car. And it's extraordinary. When you put it into a corner, even at just a little bit of moderate speed, the because the car has the capacity to switch the power to exactly where it wants it, and thanks to the rather clever work that they've done with how that delivery works, you're not losing any traction at any point there at all. It means that even on slower roads, the cornering potential of this car is absolutely extraordinary. The only thing that does worry me a little bit is what happens if you encounter a problem. Yes, I know there's all kinds of intelligent safety systems, and I'm just going to show you what I mean. So if I'm entering a town now, back we go into comfort. Nobody needs to get too distressed. If you should encounter a problem while you're busy using that rear torque vectoring, I'm not quite sure I'd be completely comfortable with its ability to catch up as quickly as maybe it needed to. Why? Well, because the power is so cleanly delivered to these wheels, it just represents a little bit of a challenge in terms of having enough wiggle room to make corrections where they are necessary. Now, there's an awful lot of technology going on to ensure you shouldn't ever have to deal with that, but it's always nice to ask the question, what if? Now, if using steering wheel controls isn't quite your style, don't worry, they haven't thrown away the traditional Mercedes trackpad in the center here, and that's just as straightforward and simple to use for your main infotainment system as it ever was. As always, I'm not the world's biggest fan of the heating and cooling controls. They just feel a bit clunky, not quite as intuitive, and not quite as satisfying to use as I might like. But these large vents at the front that you can grab hold of and really twist around, well, they sit not only nicely with the aesthetic, but also very pleasurable from a driving experience point of view. So, overall and all in all, I would say that this car delivers a very nice driving experience given what you could realistically expect it to do. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're going to cram the most powerful engine possible into the car with the most up-to-date technology to make sure that you get every single Newton meter of that power available to you, then it's hardly surprising if you're going to have to make a little bit of compromise when it comes to your everyday driving experience. So is it the most comfortable ride you can get from an A-Class? Of course not. Is it the most peaceful ride around town? No. This is a beast, and if you don't want the beast, really this is not the A-Class you should be looking at. But it was always going to be important that it set itself very far apart from the A35. And that, I can promise you, it has done. You'll remember me mentioning that there's more than one way to interact with the stuff that's going on in this car technically. I'm going to say right, Jonas. Does that feel good to you?
No.
No. Jonas says no. Okay, well, actually, opportunity for blind spot. I have to tell you, I can see nothing at this moment because of that B pillar. So, worth mentioning, you do need to make sure that you're clear before carrying out maneuvers on this. But the technology, when it comes to maneuvering, is absolutely ridiculous. And by that, I mean good. The cameras all around provide you with a very good sense of exactly what's going on, and they're delivered very nicely to the system. Some of the assistance systems are a bit too much for me. I've noticed that it's a little bit more enthusiastic on the lane changing than I would like. If we do a little highway driving in a bit, I'll have the chance to show you. If you indicate to pull out, which is the first thing you're going to do before you plan on overtaking on the highway, then the car warns you immediately that there is somebody next to you. Well, clearly on the highway, there will be somebody next to you at the stage that you are indicating to pull out. So I think I could have used that waiting a little bit longer until I moved the steering wheel to suggest to the system that I wasn't aware of my own environment. Now, it is possible that that's an adjustment within the system you can make, but it's also possible that it isn't. So if you're the kind of person that bothers, you might want to look into that a bit more. That said, all of the technology comes together very well to present a very pleasing overall driving experience. And the voice interaction with Mercedes gets better and better all the time. So we always want to tell you what fuel efficiency we're getting out of vehicles. And I think you can see from this driving clip so far, we have not been driving this car like crazy people. Yeah, okay, we've done some sprint starts. We've got to show you what they look like. But we haven't been going crazy. So I think we ought to be able to get a realistic fuel consumption figure from it. Jonas, what's your best guess?
11.4.
Jonas is saying 11.4. That's kind of a cocky estimate, Jonas. What makes you feel so confident?
I don't know.
Okay, let's find out. Hey Mercedes, what's my current fuel economy?
Your average consumption since the start of the journey is 11.9 litres per 100 kilometres, and since the last reset, 11.9 litres per 100 kilometres.
Well, Jonas was out by 0.5 of a litre. I didn't think he was really that accurate to begin with. 11.9 litres. Well, if you've seen the published figures for this car, I'm pretty sure, as I did, you had a bit of a chuckle to yourself as you contemplated how likely it was that anyone would ever be achieving them. I think, honestly, real-world usage for this car has it coming in at around about 11 to 12. I mean, possibly even higher. It really does depend how you drive it, but clearly the point of this car is to be driven and to be driven hard. Because otherwise, what on earth are you buying this particular version of this car for? There are much more efficient, much more polite, gentle, easygoing versions of the car. But if you want to have the fun that this car can deliver, well, then you probably should look into acquiring a petrol station as well. Well, we all know that you can't drive quite the same way on the roads that you do on the racetrack, so this looks like an excellent spot for us to show you that straight line acceleration. First of all, we pop it in S+. Now, that's going to give us as much of the power as possible through that 8-speed DSG and get us as close to that 3.9 second 0 to 100 time as possible. Speed limit here is 90, so we're not going to deliver quite the full experience, but hopefully this will give you an idea. Feeling ready, Jonas?
Yeah.
Let's go. There it is. Okay, so I may have tipped pretty close to 100 there, but I'm slowing down now. Well, the sound, if nothing else, delivers quite a lovely, visceral experience for you. In my experience of driving this car, you can have just as much fun ripping it round some nice windy roads, enjoying that rear differential without going crazy on the speed. So sure, the speed is really, really nice, but it's the way that the power that gets delivered that really makes the mark of this car. Well, we found a little bit of highway now, and I think it's a good opportunity to show you exactly how the behavior is. So we're currently cruising at 120 kilometers per hour, and I think you can hear there is a fair amount of road noise in the cabin. I would say it's fair to suggest half of that's coming from the tires and the other half is coming from the engine. Now, I don't think there's a lot you can do about that. That's a very big, powerful engine. It's going to make noise no matter what you do with it. Other wheels, well, you know, this is a sports car in a hatchback body, dare I say, so I think you've got to expect a little bit in the way of compromise for that. Now, I'm just waiting for an opportunity to show you this overtaking feature without, of course, causing distress to a car coming past me. Let's say I want to go past this car in front. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is indicate. I'm waiting till this car's alongside me, and you can hear immediately the warning system is telling me there's a car next to me. Why is that such a big deal? Well, only if you live in a very high traffic area, like for example Chicago, you're going to spend a staggering amount of your time doing exactly that, indicating to pull out into traffic that's already there. So what I would prefer personally is that it would wait until I gave movement on the steering wheel to let it know that I'm actually doing the maneuver prior to warning me. Because if you've ever driven round rush hour Chicago, trust me, that would get old very quickly. But I don't really know that I want to turn it off. It is a very useful feature to have, and it can save you from getting into accidents. Now, the other thing that I've noticed about highway driving in this car, which is also an assistance system thing, is that the lane assistance warning can sometimes be a little bit over enthusiastic. So I'm going to have a go at seeing if I can show you what that means. I have a car directly behind me currently, so I'll wait until they've overtaken. Go on, let's have another go at that indicator. see what I mean? Okay, so I'm just going to cruise gently towards the middle of the road here. And actually we didn't get it then, that behaved perfectly. I got a light vibration on the steering wheel to warn me that I'm changing lanes, and that's exactly as I would wish it. But earlier on, I think maybe the camera had some difficulty reading the center line, and it gave me a solid warning and a loud noise on the dashboard when there was no cause to have it. So that was just a little bit more than I would have liked. But again, that is absolutely perfect. That level of lane assistance is 100% great. So maybe I was being a little bit too hasty earlier on in my judgment, because this is exactly the type of lane assistance that I really, really appreciate. Okay. And there we go. No nasty noises from indicators that time. Well, you've made the decision that what's really important to you here is styling, and that's why you've decided to go with this version. But are there any other consequences to that decision other than the fact you have a little less space in the back? Well, there is one, and that is that we are losing a little bit in acceleration for having gone with the CLA version. So how much acceleration are we having to give way to? Well, it's not that big of a drama. We get 3.9 seconds in the A45 and 4 in the CLA. What does that feel like? Feels like this. Woo! And there you go. Really not the world's biggest difference, is there? So you still get everything in terms of the dynamism, the engine noise, the excitement, the visceral thrill of all of that speed and power, but it is just a touch more refined. It's really surprising how much of a difference that extra track on those rear wheels actually provide to the way in which this car handles. It doesn't feel quite as skittish is the word I want to use, but that sort of implies that's very interesting. So that's one of those warning systems that we mentioned earlier. I believe that would be the one that tells me it doesn't like how close I'm getting to the central line. So again, when they're working well, they're really great, but every now and then some of the assistance systems you can't help but feel could be a little bit more tweaked. So back onto the drive and the performance. Well, in the CLA, thanks to that extra track you get on the rear wheels, you do have a feeling of a little bit more solidity. And that really works right throughout your driving experience. I'm currently in Sport Plus, but if I put the mode back to Comfort, without a question, this is definitely a softer, more refined ride. Jonas, would you say it's fair that we also experience a little bit less in the way of ride noise in here as well?
A little bit less.
That's my feeling too. It's almost imperceptible. It's very subtle, but it's definitely there. This car definitely feels ever so slightly more refined, but we are talking about tiny, tiny margins. I think really when you're picking between the A45 and the CLA, it is going to come down primarily to a style issue. Yes, okay, you lose out on some headspace in the back, and yes, also you have a different access to the boot. So there are a few payoffs, but those aren't really important considerations when you're buying one of these cars, because you are buying it primarily for performance. And because of that, you have to enjoy everything that comes along with it. So I really don't see any major difference in performance to be a reason to go with one over the other. It is largely a styling question. But if you enjoy looking for those tiny, tiny details, and you like just that little bit extra refinement, you try an A45 and you think, I'd just like a little bit more, then give the CLA a try. You know what? To look at the cars, the A45 styling is the one that grabs me. Maybe I'm getting a little bit older now, but for the drive, I think I quite like the CLA, you know? What do you think? Well, we've managed to find a couple of nice bends just to show you some of the CLA's handling characteristics once you start throwing it into corners. Again, that rear axle differential really making a huge difference to the way in which we can make the most out of these roads as we swing round and pour on that gorgeous power. Really a nice experience. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of this, but it probably does bear saying, the one massive downside to this enormous engine is you really immediately get the sense it would be very easy to remove your driving license once you start enjoying the full benefits of all of this power. So, as much as I really want to take these roads on, and I really want to take these roads on, unfortunately, Spain has not only some pretty stringent speeding requirements, but also some pretty nasty speeding fines. So I can't give it quite as many beans as I'd like to, but still enough to have some fun. One of the ways in which the driving experience is slightly different in the CLA is, of course, the rear view. Why? Well, clearly because the rear section is different in this car. And I have to tell you, the way that the glass has been presented with its rake at the back means that you actually have a really pleasant rear view experience in this car. Surprisingly so. The road angle is actually great. So if you're somebody who finds it really important to have a good sense of rear view within a car, I would say you're going to find this really pleasing. So what does the CLA do to the available boot space? Well, if you have a look back here, you can see Jonas's bag is not small. If I push it right to the back, you can see that there is acres of space back here, and that is, of course, the extended length. So as a broad guideline, if height is important for you and the hatchback feature of the A45, that's going to be your pick. If you still want plenty of boot space, but you don't really care about the hatchback, you really don't need to worry about available room in the CLA. Look at it, there is absolutely stacks of space. But come on, nobody is buying one of these cars because they could really care less quite what you can fit back here. Let's be honest about this. The only reason to buy either the A45 or this CLA is because you absolutely have to have the most power that it is possible to fit into this smaller chassis. The last time I drove an A45, I was blown away by how much power they've managed to squeeze into it, but also how much fun it was to drive. What's changed significantly since then is the amount of technology and the way in which it's applied to the car. Not only is this now an unbelievably even more powerful car than it was previously, but it's also possible to get more of that power out of the driving experience. How? Well, that rear differential is something else when it comes down to how you can get the power through those bends and out again. That said, neither one of these cars are cheap. You're going to be looking north of 50,000 even just to get a foot in the door, and that is a huge amount of money to be spending. At that price point, it's really essential that you get exactly what you want. Whether or not it makes sense to put this kind of power into this kind of car, it's inarguable that Mercedes really have achieved something quite extraordinary with it. So I guess the question really lands with you. Is it that important to you to have the most powerful car of its type on the road? If it is, then the money is probably going to be inconsequential. You can have just as much fun driving much cheaper versions of this car that still give you all kinds of driving excitement, but they won't be this car. So, at the end of the day, is it a crazy idea that Mercedes made this? Well, a lot of people said that last time, but then they sold an awful lot more units than anybody thought that they would. So when it comes to this car, I'm loath to write it off as saying it's just a crazy experiment as to how much you can cram into a small chassis. I think this is going to be wildly popular with a small segment of the A-Class market. And in terms of an engineering achievement, it is unbelievable to experience just what can be achieved when people take the brakes off and they say to the engineers, you know what, just give me everything you've got. That is what you experience with these cars. Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please subscribe. If you have any comments or questions, please pop them below, and we hope we'll see you again soon.